They refused to help him until a retired general walked in. Walter Jenkins pushed open the glass door of the First Pacific Bank in Sacramento, leaning heavily on his cane. The air inside was cool and sterile, and everything, from the shiny floor tiles to the spotless counters, felt too new, too impersonal. The short walk from his apartment, just 4 blocks away, had taken longer than usual. His right knee ached with every step, a stubborn souvenir from the muddy fields of Vietnam, where he once repaired tanks under enemy fire. He wore his old army cap, the faded 1st Cavalry Division patch barely hanging on. His flannel shirt was tucked into worn jeans, held up by a belt that had long forgotten its original color. In his breast pocket was a neatly folded check for $85, money his daughter sent every month from Idaho to help with groceries. She had a life of her own now. 2 kids, busy days, but she never forgot him. Walter stepped into the shortest line. The man ahead of him tapped impatiently on his phone screen. The bank was quiet, too quiet. No one made eye contact. No one smiled. Not unless they had to. When it was finally his turn, Walter approached the counter and offered the teller a kind, raspy smile. "Hi there," he said. "Just here to cash a check." She looked young, maybe mid-20s, with a tight bun, long nails, and eyes already annoyed. "ID, please," she said flatly. Walter reached for his wallet and carefully slid out a cracked, laminated California driver's license, expired for 5 years. "Don't drive anymore," he explained. "Never had a reason to renew it, but I've been cashing checks here for years. Same account, same bank. I've got my VA card, too." The teller barely glanced at the ID before sighing and walking away. She spoke briefly with a man in a slim gray suit, likely the manager. He didn't even look up, just shook his head. She returned with a rehearsed answer. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't cash this without a valid government-issued ID." Walter blinked. "Miss, I've been coming here since Reagan was president. I have my VA card. This cane isn't for show. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need some groceries." A man behind him groaned. A teenager in a hoodie stepped back like something was about to go down. But Walter didn't raise his voice. He wasn't angry, just tired. "I asked my manager," the teller said, motioning to the man in the suit. "He said no." Walter turned to look. The manager didn't even meet his gaze. With a quiet breath, Walter stepped aside. His shoulders slumped. He tightened his grip on the cane, not out of frustration, but out of weariness. What hurt most wasn't the policy. It was the way no one looked at him. Like he didn't matter. Like he hadn't spent years in the jungle keeping engines running and men alive. Like none of it counted anymore. But just as he turned to leave, the door opened behind him, and in walked someone who hadn't forgotten him. General Robert Langston wasn't supposed to be at the bank that day. He was on his way to a lunch meeting about stalled veterans' housing legislation. But something made him stop to deposit a check. As soon as he stepped inside and saw the back of Walter Jenkins, slightly hunched, cane rooted to the floor, he froze. Langston knew that posture, that man, that quiet readiness. "Walter," he called out. Walter turned, blinking in surprise. "So, it's Robert Langston," the general said, stepping forward. "You worked on my convoy outside Camaran Bay. Save our hides when the axle locked up near Long Bin. Remember?" Walter's face lit up with something between disbelief and pride. "I'll be damned. You're still alive." Langston chuckled. "Barely, but still standing." They shook hands, firmly. Decades melted away in that single grip. "What happened?" Langston asked, noticing the check still in Walter's hand. "They won't cash it," Walter said, brushing it off. "It's expired. Told them I got my VA card, account details, everything. But the teller said no. Manager didn't even look at me." Langston's smile disappeared. "It's fine," Walter added. "I'll come back another day. I've still got a few cans at home." Langston turned toward the counter. The teller glanced up, not recognizing the man in the sport coat. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Langston replied. "You can help that man right there, Walter Jenkins. Vietnam vet. Served under my command. And you just denied him service over an expired ID. So, It's just policy, she began. I don't need the speech, Langston cut in. What I need is someone here to explain why a man who risked his life for this country is being treated like he's invisible. The manager emerged, sensing tension. Can I help you? He asked cautiously. Langston turned slowly. I'm asking why a man who fixed armored vehicles under mortar fire is standing here being treated like a fraud. I understand your concern, the manager said, voice careful. But we must comply with identification policies. Don't give me unfortunately, Langston snapped. There's nothing unfortunate about a rule. What's unfortunate is applying it without care, without discretion, without respect. Silence fell. Even the annoyed man behind Walter had gone still. Langston stepped closer. His voice softened, but carried weight. You ever been shot at? Ever pulled shrapnel from your own leg because there was no one else? Slept in mud while the sky lit up above you? Walter has. And you think a piece of plastic tells you more about him than that. Walter said nothing, just stood there, stunned. No one had spoken for him like that in a long time. But Langston wasn't done. The woman behind Walter, who had remained quiet until now, finally cleared her throat. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to listen in, but that man was in the service. Langston turned to her. Here's a reason a dozen of us made it back. That's not an exaggeration. She looked at Walter with new eyes. Thank you, she said softly. Walter nodded. You're welcome. The teller stood frozen. She looked at the manager. He hesitated, then nodded. Cash it, he said, voice low. She moved quickly, took the check gently, like it might crumble. Langston stepped back. You shouldn't have to explain yourself, Walter. Not here. Not anywhere. Walter gave a faint chuckle. It's all right. I'm used to it. Been invisible for a long time. No one should get used to that, Langston replied. And in that quiet moment, the room finally understood. I can't believe it's you, Walter said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Langston laughed softly. You look more important now. Walter smirked. It's the tie, Langston said. Makes me look like I actually know what I'm doing. Walter shook his head. Still sound like a guy who used to sleep in the back of his own Jeep. I never could sleep on the ground, Langston replied. You always made fun of me for that. For a moment, Walter's eyes brightened. Yeah, I did. Behind them, the bank manager adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. I'd like to offer a formal apology on behalf of the bank, he said carefully. We weren't aware of Mr. Jenkins's history. Otherwise, we might have... Don't finish that sentence, Langston interrupted sharply. The manager froze, caught off guard. That's a problem. Langston continued, voice steady but firm. You think respect is to be earned with credentials or history. But what about simple decency? You had a polite, elderly man just trying to cash a check, and you turned him into a complication. The manager's face reddened. Langston took a step closer, not aggressive, just resolute. If he hadn't worn that hat, you'd still be ignoring him. If I hadn't walked in, he'd have left with nothing. That should bother you more than it does. I understand, the manager stammered. We'll review our procedures. Langston turned back to Walter. Come on, let's get out of here. As they moved toward the exit, a teenage boy from a corner lowered his headphones and looked up. Sir, he called. Walter stopped. Were you really in the war? The boy asked, eyes wide. Walter turned fully. I was. Vietnam? The kid pressed. Yeah, Walter said. Mechanic. Got stuck fixing a lot of busted engines and busted people. The boy stood, respect clear in his voice. That's cool. Walter tilted his head. Wasn't cool back then, but thanks. The kid nodded. Genuine, no performative pity, just real respect. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down harder than before. Walter blinked, shading his eyes beneath his cap. Langston held the door open and followed him onto the sidewalk. Around them, the city moved on. Cars rushed past, horns blared, and joggers zipped by lost in their own world. But in that moment, the air between the two men was still. You didn't have to do that, Walter said, tucking the folded bills deeper into his coat pocket. Could have let you walk, Langston replied without looking back. And you would have. Walter shrugged. I had worse days. Doesn't mean you deserved one today. They walked slowly together, two men from another time, out of place in a world that had moved too fast. But maybe, just maybe, what happened inside the bank shifted something. A few bystanders had seen it. Maybe they'd remember. Langston glanced at Walter. You doing all right otherwise? Still in that apartment off Franklin Boulevard? Walter nodded. Same squeaky stairs. Same neighbor who plays saxophone badly every night. Langston smiled. Sounds peaceful. Walter laughed softly. That's one word for it. But peace isn't always quiet. It's about being seen. For the first time in a long time, Walter felt seen. They kept walking until they reached a bench across from the old record store, the kind of place that sold nothing but memories now. Walter sank onto the bench with a slow exhale, gripping his cane before resting it between his knees. Langston lingered for a moment, then sat beside him. They sat in silence until Walter broke it. I wasn't even mad, he said quietly. Not really, Langston said, turning to him. No, Walter replied. I've been turned down for more important things than a check, housing, benefits. Hell, once I got denied a flu shot because a guy said I wasn't a priority. Said I could wait. Langston shook his head. That's what gets under my skin. Not just what they did, but how easy it was. Walter looked at him. You know what bothers me. What? I didn't even expect better. Langston was silent. The honesty cut deeper than the incident itself. Walter had command experience, had seen systems both build up and break down men like him. He wasn't bitter. He was resigned, and that was worse. I should have raised hell, Walter added, years ago. But you get tired. You tell yourself it's not worth the noise. It is, Langston said firmly. It always is. Walter nodded, eyes distant, still not used to being called sir anymore. You earned it, Langston replied, and you didn't have to step in today. But you did. Langston leaned forward. Let me tell you something. When I came back home in '73, I walked into a diner wearing my uniform. The hostess looked me up and down and said they didn't serve people like me, like I was some kind of shame. Walter raised his eyebrows. I sat down anyway, Langston went on. Some guy threw a sugar packet at me from across the room. Didn't even look my way, just did it like I wasn't human. Walter was quiet. I guess we all carry something home, he said softly. Yeah, Langston said, but no one sees it unless we show them. A breeze stayed, carrying the scent of baked asphalt and fried food from the deli down the block. Cars cruised slowly through the afternoon sun. In the record shop window, a small TV played black and white clips of old jazz concerts. The trumpeter's cheeks puffed with passion, though the sound was faint. Walter leaned back, eyes closed. You know, when I was over there, I told myself that one day, when I was old, I'd sit on a porch with a cold beer and nobody would question if I belonged. Langston didn't interrupt. I pictured grandkids running around, Walter continued. Laughter, barbecue smoke in the air, that whole picture people have. You don't have grandkids. Langston asked gently. Walter shook his head. Only one daughter. She's good to me, calls often. But life got away from her. Got away from me, too. Langston looked at him. That check today, was that all you had? Walter hesitated, then nodded. For now, Langston sighed, pressing his palms together. You should never have to scrape for basic things. I know pride's important, but there are ways to get real help. Walter waved him off gently. I know, but it's not just about money. It's how it feels walking in a place like that, knowing you're just a problem to solve, an inconvenience. Langston's voice dropped low. They'll remember today. I made sure of it. Walter turned, a small grin tugging his lips. Oh, I think you scared the hell out of that manager. Langston chuckled. Good. He needed it. They shared a laugh, quiet, but real, drawn from somewhere deeper than the moment. Before they left the bench, Langston asked one more question, one that would change what came next. He studied Walter quietly, then said, "Ever thought about telling your story?" Walter tilted his head. "Telling it to who?" "Anyone who needs to hear it." Walter scoffed softly. "Most folks don't want to hear it. They say they do, but they're just waiting to talk about gas prices or their phone bill." Langston shook his head. "I don't mean small talk. I mean real stories. What it took to survive, what it felt like to come home to a country that barely remembered you." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You trying to get me on a stage?" Langston didn't smile. "No. I'm inviting you to a Veterans Roundtable next Thursday at the Elk Grove Community Center. It's not a show, just 10 or 15 of us who talk, listen, sometimes argue, but don't let anyone shout into a hole." Walter leaned back, hands folded, calloused, steady hands, knuckles thin now, thumb scarred from a broken socket wrench. He remembered when those hands could lift an engine block without a second thought. He looked back at Langston. "What would I even say?" Langston shrugged. "Tell them about that truck in Long Bend. Or how you made a working radio from a busted fan and a matchbox. You don't have to be polished. Just honest." Walter laughed softly. "You remember that fan radio?" "Of course. I yelled at you, thought you were wasting time. Then it picked up a signal from Saigon and saved us from driving into a trap." Walter rubbed his chin. "That was a weird day. Loud. Smelled like copper and cordite." They fell silent again, but this time the quiet was easier. Langston reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded flyer, handing it to Walter. The font was tiny, the design clearly from someone in their 20s trying to appeal to people in their 70s. A bold eagle, an American flag faded behind the words. "Veterans talking, real stories, real brotherhood." On the back was Langston's number. "If you come, great. If not, I'll probably keep bugging you anyway." Walter slipped it into his coat pocket. "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask." They sat a while longer, letting the moment settle as life moved on around them. A city bus hissed at a stop, a coffee cup tumbled into the gutter. Time hadn't paused, but for those few minutes, it felt like it gave them a little space. Then Walter said something unexpected. "You know, I didn't say that convoy for recognition. I didn't think about medals or stories. I just knew if I didn't fix that truck, men would die. That was it. That simple." Langston nodded. "But this," Walter said, "this little moment in a bank today, it reminded me that silence lets people forget. If you never speak up, they'll never know what you've seen, what you've done, and maybe they'll keep treating every old man with a cane like he's already halfway gone." Langston said nothing, just a slow nod. Walter adjusted his cap, then added, "You weren't just speaking for me in there. You were speaking for all the ones who didn't make it back to stand in line. And for the ones who did, but don't have the strength to speak anymore." Langston said quietly, jaw clenched in recognition. "Maybe," Walter said slowly, "I will come next Thursday." Langston gave him a look, not praise, just quiet affirmation. "Good," he said. "We need your voice." But before they parted, something waited around the corner neither expected. Back inside the bank, the manager's office door shut tight. Jordan Reeve, the branch manager, stood stiff behind his desk, gripping the phone like it might bite him. On the other end was Angela McCoy, the regional director, who had spent the last 15 minutes getting a full report from an employee who texted her during the incident. "No, I'm not asking." Angela's voice was sharp. "I'm telling you. You call that man. Apologize. Get ahead of this before it spreads. That man has a name." "Walter Jenkins," Jordan replied, voice tight, and the man who intervened was General Robert Langston, retired U.S. Army. There was a long pause. "Jesus, Jordan," Angela muttered. "You turned away a war veteran with expired ID and doubled down when a general vouched for him. That's not just a PR risk. That's a failure of judgment." "I didn't know who he was," Jordan said quickly. "You shouldn't have needed to," Angela snapped. "An elderly man with a VA card should have been enough to stop and think." Jordan shifted, still gripping the phone. "So, what do you want me to do now?" Angela didn't hesitate. "First, you call him. Offer a formal apology. Second, Send a handwritten letter, something personal, not a form letter. Third, schedule you and your staff for a sensitivity and customer experience workshop next week. Jordan sighed. We've already done the annual compliance training. I said next week. She cut in. He didn't argue further. Angela added, for what it's worth, I'll be reaching out to Mr. Jenkins myself. If we can't do better than this, we don't deserve to call ourselves a community bank. When the call ended, Jordan leaned back, palms pressed into his desk, sweat beading under his collar. He'd managed branches for nearly a decade, but never found himself at the center of something like this. The worst part wasn't the mistake. It was how easily it had happened. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Walter and Langston were just starting to part ways when Walter's flip phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He paused, pulling it out slowly, squinting at the unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Jenkins," said a woman's voice. "This is Angela McCoy, Regional Director at First Pacific. I'm calling personally to apologize for what happened to you today at our J Street branch." Walter glanced at Langston, who raised an eyebrow. Angela continued, "I understand you were denied service even after showing your VA card and being a long-time customer. That should never have happened. We're taking this very seriously, and corrective action is already underway." Walter was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm not angry, just tired, that's all. I understand." "But tired or not," Angela replied, "you deserve to be treated with dignity. We failed you today." Walter let out a small breath. "Thank you for calling," he said quietly. "There will also be a letter sent to your home," she added. "And if you're comfortable, I'd like to invite you to speak briefly at our next Community Advisory Board meeting. Hearing from someone like you could help change how our staff view situations beyond policy." Walter chuckled. "Getting popular today, huh?" Angela smiled on the other end. "You're already someone worth listening to, Mr. Jenkins. We just failed to listen in time." They hung up. Langston gave Walter a look. "She gravel?" Walter grinned. "Just enough." Langston laughed. "Good. It's a start." Walter pocketed the phone. "Never thought I'd get invited to speak anywhere outside a waiting room." "You still have a lot to say," Langston said, "and people who need to hear it." They resumed walking toward the bus stop. What neither realized yet was how far this small clash inside a little bank branch was already spreading. The bench across the street had emptied, and the sun was slowly dipping behind rooftops. Walter and Langston stood at the corner, just steps from the bus stop. The city moved on, unaware of what had happened inside that building, but the air felt different now. Some people who had witnessed it lingered on the sidewalk, caught between wanting to speak up and fearing they might say the wrong thing. A young woman with a messenger bag and a faded Ukla hoodie, no older than 30, approached cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," she said uncertainly. "I was in line earlier. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Walter turned to her slowly. "Sorry for what?" "For not saying anything. For watching and doing nothing. It didn't feel right, but I just stood there. I shouldn't have." Walter studied her face. She meant it. "You didn't have to speak," he said gently. "Most people don't. That's just how it's been." "But it shouldn't be," she insisted. "You were disrespected. Everyone saw it. We just let it happen like it was nothing." Langston stepped forward. "You're saying something now. That counts." The woman nodded, glancing back at Walter. "Thank you for what you did back then and today." Walter gave a half smile. "Just fix trucks. That's all I did." "No," she said. "You stood tall when everyone else sat down." She turned and walked away, leaving them in silence. Moments later, an older man wearing a delivery uniform jogged over from across the street, slightly out of breath. "Hey, sir, I just wanted to shake your hand," he said, extending it. Walter looked at the hand, then took it. "I did a couple tours myself. Logistics in Kuwait. Nothing big, but seeing someone stand up for us means a lot. I saw it from the sidewalk. Respect." Walter nodded, saying little. The man didn't need a speech. He gave a short salute and hurried back to his van. Langston looked at Walter. "You seeing a pattern?" Walter exhaled slowly. people realizing they had eyes the whole time. They kept walking. The sidewalk was cracked and patched, temporary fixes on a tired city. A passing car honked once, a brief, friendly acknowledgement. A thumbs up came from the window. Walter didn't react. Not because he didn't appreciate it, but because he wasn't used to being noticed for anything other than his limp. As they neared the crosswalk, Langston slowed. "Let me ask you something." "All right. Do you think if I hadn't walked in, anyone else would have stepped up for you?" Walter was quiet, then finally said, "I don't think so. Not because people are cruel, but because they are scared to get involved, scared to be wrong, scared to look stupid." Langston nodded, and scared of their own comfort being disrupted. "Exactly." The traffic light turned red, and they crossed together. "Maybe," Walter went on, "all it takes is one moment like that to make someone less scared the next time. That girl, the delivery guy, they won't stay quiet again." Langston looked over. "You think you changed them?" Walter shook his head. "Nah, I think they changed themselves. I just gave them a reason." A bus groaned to a stop, doors opening. Walter turned to Langston. "This is me." Langston extended his hand. "Call me before Thursday." Walter smiled. "I will. And if you don't, I'll come find you anyway." Langston smirked. "You know I will." Walter climbed aboard slowly, waving once before sitting near the front. As the bus pulled away, Langston stood watching until it disappeared around the corner. The street returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. Something small, but lasting. The biggest change was still to come, and it wouldn't be quiet. 3 days later, Walter hadn't planned on going anywhere. The flyer Langston gave him sat on the counter by the microwave, next to unopened mail and a half-finished grocery list. But every time Walter passed it, something inside stopped him. Not guilt, not pressure, but something quieter. Something like purpose. On the 4th day, he took the flyer with him on the bus to the corner diner. He didn't eat there often. Prices were creeping up, but the waitress knew his name, and the eggs came with 2 free refills of black coffee. He took his usual booth, pulled out the flyer, and stared at it between bites of toast. That's when the man in the next booth leaned over. "You the guy from a bank video?" Walter looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "What video?" The man held up his phone and tilted it. There it was, grainy cell phone footage of Walter at the counter, Langston stepping in, the moment the room went silent. The title read, "Old Vet Denied at Bank." The man said, "I saw that 5 times. You handled it real respectful, nothing like most folks would have." Walter didn't answer right away. He hadn't known anyone was recording. The man laughed. Some kid posted it on TikTok. Said it changed how he sees his own grandfather. Walter shook his head slowly. Wasn't looking to be on the internet. "Maybe you weren't," the man said, "but maybe folks needed to see it." By the time Walter got home, 3 missed calls waited for him. One from Langston, one from a woman at a local news station, and one from someone with a southern accent asking if he'd speak at a high school assembly. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the voicemails one by one. After the last, he picked up the fly again. Maybe it wasn't about one check or one bank. Maybe the real problem was how many people this happened to every day, and how few had someone like Langston walking behind them. That evening, Walter called Langston back. "You see that video?" Walter asked as soon as Langston answered. Langston chuckled. "Yeah, been on the phone all day. Some city rep wants to invite us to a round table on senior treatment in public services." Walter sighed. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Langston said, "but maybe you were the one who finally said something, even if it was just by standing there." Walter was quiet. "You think this changes anything?" "Depends," Langston replied. "If people talk about it for a week and then move on, probably not. But if you show up next Thursday, and the Thursday after, and keep showing them what quiet dignity looks like, maybe then it does." Walter didn't respond at first. Then, "I'll be there next Thursday." Walter showed up wearing the same cap and jeans. He stood at the front of a small room with mismatched chairs and faded flags on the wall. About 20 people were there. Some veterans, some teens, a few city employees who looked like they came out of obligation. Langston introduced him. This man didn't ask to speak today, but the way he was treated sparked something bigger than any of us expected. Walter cleared his throat and walked to the front slowly. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "I fix things. That's always been my thing. You hand me something broken, I try to make it run again." He paused. "But you can't fix people. Not the same way. You can't just swap out a part and expect them to run right. What you can do is see them, treat them like they matter, not because of what they used to do, but because they are still here." A few heads nodded. No phones were out, just eyes. "And maybe next time someone like me walks into a room," Walter added, "you don't wait for someone with stars on their shoulder to speak first." Even as he said it, Walter didn't realize how far his words would travel, or who would be listening next. The following week, a letter arrived at Walter's mailbox from a senator's office, someone he'd never heard of. The message was personal. It thanked him, not just for his service, but for his recent talk at the Veterans Gathering. Someone had recorded his short speech and shared it. That clip was now being used in staff training sessions for government employees across the state. Walter stared at the letter, unmoving. His name had never appeared on government letterhead for anything but taxes. He folded the paper carefully and set it on the kitchen table. Minutes later, a knock came at the door. Langston stood there, holding 2 coffees. "Didn't think I'd find you home," the general said with a smile. "Thought you might have gone viral again." Walter grunted. Already had a stranger asked for a selfie at the grocery store. Langston laughed, handing him a cup. "Get used to it." They sat on Walter's small balcony as the sky faded soft orange. City sounds hummed below. The balcony railing was rusted in spots. Walter had fixed it 3 times. "I never wanted attention," Walter said after a long pause. Langston nodded. "You didn't ask for it. You earned it." Walter looked over. "For a long time, I thought the world just moved on, left people like me behind." Langston swirled his coffee. "Sometimes it does. But then a moment like that one in the bank reminds people, we're still here, still watching, still worth listening to." They sat quietly, comfortable, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. "I've been thinking," Walter said, "maybe I do keep showing up. That group we talked to, that wasn't just talk. Some of those folks left with something they didn't have when they walked in." Langston sipped his coffee. "That's how change starts." Walter looked out toward the street. A bus passed slowly, headlights blinking rhythmically. He thought of the teller, the manager, the people in line who looked away. Maybe some told the story later. Maybe some pretended it never happened. But a few, he was sure, had seen something worth remembering. "You think people really change?" Walter asked suddenly. Langston thought a moment. "Not all at once, but sometimes you witness something you can't unsee. And from that point on, you don't walk the same way anymore." Walter leaned back in his chair. "I like that." "You should," Langston said. "You cause it." They gently clinked their coffee cups. Not a toast, just an acknowledgement. As the light faded, a breeze swept across the balcony. Walter looked at the faded flag pinned above his window, its corners curled from age. He didn't feel like a symbol. He didn't want to be one. He was just a man trying to be treated like he mattered. And somehow, that had become more than enough. He turned to Langston one last time. "Next Thursday, same place." Langston nodded. "Wouldn't miss it."